Welcome back to the Tech Startup Network podcast. Joining me today is Jodi Innerfield, a marketing strategist and consultant helping enterprise companies and high growth startups with product launches, storytelling, and go to market strategy. Previously, she spent 8 years at Salesforce as a marketing leader, spanning content and solutions marketing, GTM, product launches, messaging and positioning, and PLG. Jodi's marketing and leadership perspectives reach audience through her Marketing Musings newsletter and through speaking engagements and interviews, including CNN International, Harvard Business School, and the University of Michigan. Jodi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, it's very exciting to have you here. I'd love to have you start off by sharing with our listeners more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I am a product marketing strategist and consultant. I spent about 8 years at Salesforce doing product marketing across different teams, from our platform team to emerging business to launches to PLG. As it happens in this economy, I was laid off in 2024 and didn't really know what I wanted to do next. I didn't really see another tech company that I wanted to go and do product marketing for. And I always had in the back of my head, especially since layoffs had started, years before, if I ever got laid off, I'd want to work for myself. I'd want to go and do what I do at Salesforce, but do it for a bunch of different companies from a consulting basis. And so as I was getting laid off, I was like, oh, damn, I've got to go do the thing I said I would do and go consult. And so luckily, I just kind of hit the ground running, reaching out to my network, which is mostly people who used to work at Salesforce and who are now SVPs or CMOs at whether like startups or enterprise businesses. And I just said, hey, I'm thinking about, going out on my own. What do you think? So now I do that. I help companies basically tell better product stories. So that can take a couple of different forms. That can be your core messaging, positioning, and storytelling for your core product or for a new product. How do we actually articulate the benefits and the value of this product, not just talk about the features? Because especially now that it's so easy to vibe code an app, the features are kind of the same for a lot of different products, but the benefits and the tangible solutions that you're delivering and the problems you're solving and how you tell that story is different. So I help companies through messaging and positioning, through narrative storytelling. I also help larger or more mid-market companies kind of put process in place around release marketing, product launches, anything that kind of accelerates and scales their impact. And then I also do some training so I can train teams on these things. I can kind of hands-on do it. I do coaching as well for either people who are newer to marketing leadership or people who have been in marketing leadership but maybe newly taking on product marketing, so they're not as familiar with the ins and outs of launches and messaging and that type of thing. um and then, there are some one-off fun projects like video. I'm really into video right now. And so I'm helping a couple of companies figure out their YouTube content strategy or their video strategy. And how do you take what is traditionally seen as a B2C or a very consumer-driven modality like YouTube or TikTok, but how can brands and companies start to dip their toe in the water, not in a, here's my product demo way,
Yeah.
but in a, engaging either education or edutainment type way. So having a lot of fun doing all that on my own. And when I'm not doing the marketing side of my business, I have my own podcast. This is going to be a hard pivot for your listeners, but it's a Taylor Swift podcast. It's called AP Taylor Swift. We do deep reading and literary analysis of Taylor Swift's lyrics. So there's a through line, there's a consistency there. Storytelling. Storytelling is really what her songwriting is about. And storytelling is also what my day job is about. So I can make those connections.
I love it. And you worded it perfectly where it's like people and consumers and customers like don't really care about what your product does or what the features are. They care about how it helps them. So especially now
Correct.
with AI being everywhere, it's like slapping AI powered language over everything isn't a differentiator. And people don't care if something's
No,
AI. They care if it's solving the challenge that they've been facing.
correct. And there was someone just sent me a reel from this creator that does voiceover acting. And it was like a parody of like every podcast ad today. Business is in the business of business. And now business has AI and AI. And it's like, oh my God, that is exactly what every podcast ad sounds like, because everyone's just slapping AI and scale and productivity. But it's like, what are you actually doing? What problems are you actually solving for your unique audience? And that requires knowing specifically who your ideal customer profile is and what are their pains and their problems. And so there's a real psychology behind marketing. And that's like my long-tailed journey. I was a psych major. I didn't go into psychology thinking I wanted to be a psychologist or a marketer, but it actually, at the end of the day, marketing is about people and it's
Hmm.
about what makes them tick. What are their interests? How do you get them to pay attention to what you're offering? And you
Hmm.
really have to understand people's behaviors and motivations and needs. And so at the end of the day, yeah, telling somebody about the cool features doesn't mean anything if you don't understand why those features help them.
Hmm. 100%. And that's the perfect segue into what I'd love to ask you is that, of course, product marketing is super important for every size stage company, but especially for the early stage companies. And
Hmm.
so for our listeners here who may be a founder in the early stage, we're starting to think about their product marketing strategy. Where should they start? I can imagine it's
Yeah.
probably overwhelming. It's like there's so many things to focus on. Where do I even begin? Would love to hear from your perspective, the first best steps.
Yeah, it is overwhelming. And I think often early stage founders, product marketing is not your first hire at all. A lot of founders will lead marketing and sales on their own because they are the story, right? They are passionate about what they are doing. And then, so I think at that stage, it's having if it's just you and some developers, having a really clear story and a clear why. Again, I go back to how easy it is for anybody to vibe code an app. That's both good and bad. It's good because it means the people who actually have a problem to solve now they'll have a lower barrier to entry to actually build something that solves that problem. But the bad means there's just so many people out there trying to solve the same problems. And so how you tell that story becomes even more important. And again, the features aren't all that different. At the end of the day, 9 times out of 10, most B2B SaaS products or even like any sort of application is about making something automated, making it faster, and making it more secure and easier to use. That's it. Like those
Hmm.
are the like what you're doing. But who are you doing that for? What is the unique problem that you are solving? What are they coming from? So for example, if you are a an app that helps make it easier to send invoices, right? Who are you targeting? Are you targeting or another early stage founder or solopreneur who needs to chase down those invoices and like if they don't get paid, they can't pay their own rent the next day? Okay, well then making sure that they can track read receipts, and making sure that they can stay on top of these things and get paid faster. There's an emotional story there.
Hmm.
I think the biggest thing I would say, whether you were an early stage founder or a late stage, you know, executive, especially for B2B, we lose the plot that at the end of the day, buyers are people. The people buying your software, even if it's a business, if it's a buying committee made up of 10 people, the CEO, the CIO, and all these people you have to jump through the hoops to get them to say yes, those are humans. Those are people who have needs and wants and motivations and pains. And so, how can you connect with them on an emotional human level? It's probably not by having Claude do all your messaging and your storytelling. It's probably instead by actually tapping into, okay, why did I build this? Who is it for? What problems do they have? And what could their life look like with this product? Not where do they click, not
Hmm.
how cool is the UI interface, but because of this cool UI interface, now they get to spend time with their kids at the end of the day. They make sure they can be on top of their invoices faster, whatever it is. Like, what is the emotionally resonant thing that will connect somebody with, oh, right, that's why I need your product. That's why I need your service. And I think early stage founders spend so much time focusing on the nuts and bolts of how to build and monetize and not enough time on the what is the emotional thing that is going to get someone to easily hand over their credit card to buy this.
Yeah, which is a really great point because emotions evoke action. So I love that you phrase it that
Hmm.
way, where it's like when people read something and it makes them feel a certain way, that's what will get people to purchase your product and take that next step, or book a demo, whatever it might be. And so one
Yeah,
question I
that's
have
what
for,
creates connection. Anytime
yeah.
emotions create any type of connection. Again, not to bring Taylor Swift into this conversation, but I can't help it. But like her lyrics are emotionally resonant for people. And so it creates a connection
Mhm.
both with her, but also among fans and whatnot. And so I think it's the same thing in marketing, right? You want a story or a message that has some sort of emotional connection. Otherwise, you're just this, the business of business is AI, and you're going to scale faster with our AI, then like it's boring.
It is boring. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree that it's fun to add the more creative parts into it and unique parts into it for
Yes.
sure. And one question I have for you is that I feel like I've been noticing a lot lately. There are startups that have a product that can actually benefit multiple audiences. They might have multiple target personas. And so I'm curious what you would recommend in that instance. Like, for example, if a company has a product that's for both B2B and B2C, how should they think
Hmm.
about their product marketing strategy from that standpoint?
Oh, it's so hard because the when you have an ideal customer profile, you're looking at the ideal, right? The I
Hmm.
in ICP is ideal. So, but if you're talking to everybody, you're talking to nobody
Hmm.
because a B2B and a B2C are two very different use cases with very different needs. And just because you are positioning and focusing your product and your marketing on one audience does not mean other people won't buy it, value it, see the benefit in it. But
Hmm.
especially at an early stage, you have to be clear. You have to make some choices about who is this ideally for? And that is the person we're going to talk to. Other people will say, "Oh, I want that too." Then that's great. But you're going to confuse people if you try and talk to everybody. And so I think that is probably the hardest thing, not just for early stage companies. I'm talking mid-market and enterprise as well. I mean, I've worked at and for some very large organizations that market to almost everybody. And it's really complicated because people don't understand the problems you're solving if you're trying to solve everybody's problems, right? You
Hmm.
want to be specific. So even, if you're a product that is for marketers, are you positioning to the CMO or are you positioning to the practitioner, right? Whose pain and problem are you trying to solve? Those are very different. Yes, the CMO is probably the decision maker. The practitioner is the one hands on keyboard using it, but what problem are you solving? You probably in that case want to talk about, how you are connecting. Again, I'm using a generic thing, so I don't have a product in mind, but you probably want to talk about what customer problem are you solving in the marketing world and how do you make it easier for marketers to solve that customer problem. But you have to be aware of if you are talking at too high a level to the CMO, you might lose the practitioners and the people who need to use your technology who will actually be the ones that test it and bring it into the buying cycle. But if you focus too much on here's how to use our product, then you're going to lose the thread on the benefits and the emotional resonance. You kind of have to say, okay, this is for marketers who are trying to solve this problem for their customers and stay at that level. And at least for your like marketing messaging, for your website, for your I'm talking core positioning. Most companies, when you get into a buying cycle, have content that is geared towards different audiences because, again, there's different people involved in a buying cycle. But if you're talking about your website main message, your tagline, your main campaign, pick one clear audience because otherwise
Mhm.
people aren't going to understand that it's for them.
Yeah, I love that idea. It's just like keeping that one group in mind that you want to be able to serve. And then you can go more into the intricacies with different content that you push out, but making sure that you're really
Different
resonating with that one group.
Yeah, different content, different audiences. I mean, I look at something like TikTok, right? TikTok is
Mhm.
clearly launched and positioned as a B2C app, right? It is, and
Mhm.
and it needed to be in order to get scale, to get the network effects of having enough people on the app, purely from a social and engagement perspective. But it's also a huge opportunity for B2B buying because again, I go back to who are your buyers? Your buyers are people. And many of those people, especially if you are targeting millennial and Gen Z as your audience, even if you're, millennials or make buying decisions for businesses, they're on TikTok. And so now TikTok does obviously have components for B2B, right? Advertising and targeting, segmentation, but that's not their top line message. That is not when you go on, I mean, I don't want anyone goes on TikTok.com, but like when they're talking about the app, that's not who they're talking to.
Mhm.
But they do have features and functionality for that. And that's a different conversation, but that's not their top line positioning. That's not their top line target. Their target are all of the people who will use the app. That's their ideal profile. Then they have a B2B, team who on the side will go out and say, actually, here's how we help you and your business grow. But that's not their main raison d'etre for their product.
For sure. Yeah. And as I'm sure this is something you probably tell your clients all the time, but product marketing strategy isn't just a one and done thing. It's something that needs to be
Absolutely not.
reevaluated. And so I'd love to hear more about that for companies, like how they know if their product marketing strategy is working, how they know if it
Yeah.
isn't working, some things that they might need to keep in mind or metrics to track. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I do a messaging and positioning training, and there's this image in it of an iceberg. And the idea is that under the top above the iceberg, what everybody sees is your messaging, right? That's
Hmm.
the tagline that's out in the world. That's how you're talking about your products. And, like icebergs and, climate change, like that erodes, that changes over time, right? So your messaging will likely change and evolve over time based on, seasonality, your products that you're launching, what changes, da, da, da. But underneath the water, underneath the surface, much larger and more stable and unchanging is your positioning. What are you doing? Who are you for? And why do you do it? Right? Like that. So
Hmm.
that positioning is stable. If your positioning is changing a lot, you're probably in a very thrashy environment where you're totally changing the product. But your messaging needs to evolve. I think a lot about, and that means your storytelling needs to evolve. Your narrative needs to evolve. That also probably means the products you're building and launching are changing to meet the growing and changing needs of your customers. So that means that from a product marketing perspective, you should be of revisiting your messaging, revisiting, your launches and your launch plans, release marketing, all of those things change all the time. I think a lot about, again, in B2B in particular, how much messaging and storytelling and even the changes from like a macroeconomic perspective. So I've seen a lot of, now no one really knows. Are we in a recession? Are we going into recession? Who really knows? But I think about, when COVID hit, immediately we had to change messaging and positioning around to meet the environment, right? To
Hmm.
talk about safety and security, we also had to shift our product launch strategy, both because we had to build different products that would be more suitable for remote audiences, but also we couldn't do in-person events to launch these products. So we had to really shift how are we reaching these customers? Even something as simple as, direct mail campaigns used to be huge, or even targeting, you would, target IP addresses for the different companies in the offices that didn't exist. So how are you reaching people? So obviously COVID is a huge, once in a generation change, but other changes like that happen all the time on a smaller level that also impact your messaging. I think about, you know, you have traditional seasonality, uh, um, holiday time, whatnot. You have a lot of companies, with AI changing so rapidly, everyone's kind of looking to what these frontier models are doing and changing, and then
Right.
that then shifts what everybody else's approach and message is. I think about how in 2022 when ChatGPT came out, everyone was calling everything a GPT, and then it changed to AI, and then it changed to agents, and now it's agentic, and who knows what the next thing is going to be.
Yeah.
So all of this is to say, product marketing, you're positioning who you're for, why you exist. Like that's probably not going to change, but everything else evolves. And I don't know that it should be a 180 every time, because then you're
Hmm.
going to lose your customer base and you're really going to confuse people. But there's a constant evolution of messaging, of storytelling, of product launches, of how you reach your customers. that I think that's really the value that product marketing adds, because product marketing sits between your product team, your sales team, and your customers to understand not just the internal dynamics of what are we launching, but also the external and market impacts of what do our customers want, but what are our competition doing? What's happening in the marketplace? And how do we tie all of these forces together to make our product stand out?
Mhm. Absolutely. And on that note of differentiating against competitors, one thing that I read probably a month or so ago at this point is that LLMs like ChatGPT and Claude are being used so much more often to ask about product comparisons. So people might go to something
Yeah.
like Claude and say, should I go with Salesforce or HubSpot? And asking questions like that. And so I'm curious how that comes into play from a product marketing standpoint, is like thinking about these LLMs and how companies need to think about it and incorporate it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wrote recently about, maybe it was last year, I don't know, time doesn't matter, that your website almost matters less right now
Hmm.
because people aren't going to your website first to see what you do and who you're for. They're going to ChatGPT and Claude and
Hmm.
Perplexity. And so that's not to say your website doesn't matter. It does. What matters is consistency of message across touch points. So you're not, but it's not just your website. It's Reddit, it's
Hmm.
Gartner and G2. It's what our customers and analysts saying about your product. I think it feels very similar to the way GEO now generated a like what do they call it? Generation engine optimization, right? Optimizing for LLMs feels very similar to SEO, search engine optimization, where there was always a workaround for
Hmm.
SEO. SEO, you know, in its most pure form was reading what was on your website and saying, "Oh, you must be solving this problem because of what's on your website." But companies got around that by creating SEO blog posts and SEO
Hmm.
pages filled with the keywords so that they would trend for the right things. And I say they, I mean, I've done it. I've built it. I've been part of it. It's what we do. Similar things are happening on the LLM and generative search side of things, not even just I mean even Google, like people are still using Google for search, but now your top option is a Gemini AI generated search, which is pulling from, website. It wants authority similar to
Hmm.
SEO, but it wants consistency of authority on multiple pages across Reddit, across your FAQs, across across YouTube, across wherever people are talking about your product. And so your website, where it used to be the first place people went to, is now one of the last places people are going to. And so you really need consistency. You really need clarity. You always needed that, to be clear, but now there's this filter that you have
Hmm.
no control over. And so if you are this goes back to like, how often do you change your messaging? How often do you change your pricing? That can really confuse things. So
Yeah.
yes, I go back to my previous answer of like, that messaging is an evolution, but I'm not talking a monthly evolution. I'm talking like quarterly or like twice a year.
Hmm.
And evolution, not revolution. And that's also why you want to be really clear on who you're for, because you want to trend and you want to come up for searches for a specific buyer. Because someone's going to say, what's the best software, the best CRM if I am a marketer and I just want my sales teams to put in their information so I can use it? Well,
Hmm.
you've got to be really clear on your positioning on who you're for. And so I think it's changing every day how these models work. These frontier models are changing every day. Their algorithms are changing every day. I feel like product marketers are now feeling what social media marketers have felt for years with how quickly, social media algorithms change all the time. And so now we are feeling the whiplash where it's no longer just our website that, we kind of control. It used to be just the website, and then it was the website and G2 crowd, and then it was the website G2 crowd and like your analysts. And now it's kind of like the wild west of go figure out how everybody is talking about you and make sure it's consistent. And
Hmm.
oh my God, it's really hard.
It
It's
is
really
really
hard.
hard.
Yeah.
If there's one piece of advice you could give to startups that are thinking about their product marketing strategy, what would that tip be?
I think product marketing strategy sounds really complicated, and it can be as complicated as you want it to be. But at the end of the day, it comes back down to who is your audience and
Hmm.
how are you talking to them in a compelling way and relating to them as people. I
Yeah.
don't even like to say the word humans anymore because everyone's overusing like human versus AI. They're people.
Yeah.
And so your product marketing strategy, yes, product is in the word, but it's not talking about your product. It's talking about how your product helps people.
Hmm.
And so that at the end of the day has to be the core of your product marketing strategy. How is my product or service helping people? And then
Hmm.
the strategy part of it becomes great. How do I solidify that message? How do I articulate that story? And how do I get that message and story into the right channels and to the right people? That's the strategy part of it. The foundations are that messaging, positioning, and that core narrative. And I think especially for a founder-led business or a like small startup that is hiring its first salespeople, right? Even before you have a marketer, like how are your sales teams going to talk about your product? How
Hmm.
are you going to talk about your product on your website? I think founders are so used to being the ones that own the story, own the message. And this goes for enterprises as well. But newer founders or at smaller companies have experienced this challenge for the first time of other people have to be able to tell your story too, and not your story, your product story. And
Hmm.
so you've really got to be clear and take the time to articulate it and take the time to write it down and take the time to make it more of a strategy and not just your own what's in your own head. Because for your product or your company to be successful, you can't be the only one selling it and talking about it.
Yes, that's so true. There's so many other stakeholders that come to it. Like you said, whether
Yeah.
it's other teams within your company, investors, having your
Yeah.
employees, like so many other factors. So love that.
Other
Just make sure
customers,
for
like
it.
you have to have
Yeah.
other people have to be able to articulate your story and your message.
Hmm.
And this is where there's this difference between the founder's story and the company's story. The founder's story is a great story because that usually has personal and emotional resonance behind it, but it doesn't land the same way when somebody else tells it.
Right.
So, how do you adapt that story to become the company story or the product story? And the company story or the product story is probably more about the customer and the
Hmm.
problem you solve for them than it is about the founder. I'm not saying you have to ditch the founder story because I think that has its value in certain places. In investing, VCs are often investing in the person, not
Hmm.
necessarily in the company. But you really, from a product marketing standpoint, that means really thinking about the product and the company and what's the product and the company's story. And that means how does it impact the customer?
100%. And one of my favorite questions to ask our guests is to give a shout out to someone in tech that they really admire right now. So it could be a fellow consultant, a founder, VC, community builder. Would love to hear who's been on your radar.
Oh my God, I love this. Um, my friend Laurel started this company, Free Puppies Creative. She also used to be at Salesforce, but before that was in comedy and a comedy writer. And her whole
Oh.
thing is bringing comedy for commerce. And again, I go back to at the end of the day, buyers are people. And what do people like?
Hmm.
We like comedy, we like funny. And so she basically created an agency to employ comedy writers to write for businesses, for social
Oh,
or
I
for
love
campaigns or
that.
whatnot. Yeah, and I think it just goes like one of my favorite things. I think B2B can be really boring, or it has a
Hmm.
rap for being really boring. And that's why I was, when I was in business school at Michigan, go blue. I can't believe I didn't mention that. And initially when I was looking at jobs, I really wanted to go into B2C because I was like that. I had come from ad tech. Ad tech was boring, B2B boring, and I really wanted to go into B2C. It was really sexy. Just to like, because you are the consumer, right? It's just more fun. You can take more risks. And that didn't happen. I ended up in B2B and then at Salesforce. But one of the things I loved about being at Salesforce was that we always took inspiration from B2C. And actually, I'll shout out another person, Shannon Duffy, who used to be SVP of product marketing for platform at Salesforce. Now she's the CMO of Okta. And I think she really encouraged and inspired us to take risks
Hmm.
and go big and take inspiration from our everyday lives, from B2C, from just all the fun things. And how can you make, especially we were marketing at the time, platform, IT and developer products, which again can be really boring. How do you make it fun? So like we built an escape room or we built a VR game. Like we just did really cool things. And so I really credit Shannon for im imbuing in me the idea that B2B marketing can be fun. You can take inspiration fun, engaging things. And I think Laurel is doing that with Free Puppies Creative and building that so that that becomes approachable for lots of different businesses.
Love those. Such good shout outs.
Yeah.
Jodi, this has been such a fun episode, and I've so enjoyed having you on the show to dive into all things product marketing strategy. As you know, super important for startups of any stage. And I'd love to have you share with their listeners where they can find you online in case they'd like to connect.
Yeah. You can find me on LinkedIn, Jodi Innerfield, on my website, jodibeth.com. I'm on Substack at Jodi Talks. And you can, if you're a Taylor Swift fan or you have a Swiftie in your life, you can find us at AP Taylor Swift, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Amazing. And I'll include those places in the show notes for listeners to easily find you. But thank you so much again for coming on today's episode.
Thanks for having me.